This week, Dr. Kelley Misata, founder and CEO of Sightline Security, is with us to discuss securing nonprofits. Then Keith Jarvis from Secureworks joins us to talk about the latest cybercrime insights and observations. Finally, in the enterprise security news, more startups get funding to secure generative AI and LLMs. Broadcom celebrates the completion of its VMware acquisition with layoffs. Amazon's closest ChatGPT competitor, Q, is now available. Some interesting new open source security tools. Binance's founder pleads guilty. Secureworks COO pleads guilty. Hacking Team's founder arrested for attempted murder. Ransomware, and more ransomware. Ransomware is everywhere. All that and more on this episode of Enterprise Security Weekly.
This is a Security Weekly production for security professionals by security professionals. Please visit securityweekly.com/subscribe to subscribe to all the shows on our network.
Broadcasting live from G-Unit Studios in Rhode Island, it's the show where we talk security vendors and aren't afraid to name names. It's Enterprise Security Weekly. Welcome to Enterprise Security Weekly and happy first anniversary to ChatGPT. This is episode 341, recorded on Thursday, November 30th, 2023. I'm your host, Adrian Sanabria, and I have COVID. And joining me is the Czar of Zero Trust, the captain of content, voted the second most likely host on this podcast to have 2024 predictions in draft form somewhere, Katie Teitler-Santulo. How are you, Katie?
I am well, and I fortunately do not have COVID. I'm sorry to hear that you do, Adrian.
Yeah, I might have to stifle some coughs while I'm on here, toggle the mute button a bit, but the symptoms are pretty light, so I should be able to make it through the podcast without retiring or perspiring too much.
Well, we'll do what we can. We're pretty scrappy on this show, so whatever we have to do, we'll do.
We had to do some scrapping to get things going here. It's technology is a guess at best. Just not Skype is not having its day today. Neither apparently is Discord. But yeah. So new hyphenated name there. Congrats.
Thank you. It's been a little bit, but yes. Indeed.
Well, it's the first I noticed you using it, so I made sure to change it in our system that we use that puts our names on the website and puts together the show notes and all that stuff. So I thought I'd change it in my script as well.
Why, thank you. Yes, it's there's just no way, despite how awful my my maiden name is, that I can ever get rid of it. I'm published in too many places that if people start Googling me and they don't have my maiden name, then I'm SOL. So a very long hyphenated last name it is.
Yeah, it's a weird practice, right? It's kind of weird to get rid of like half your identity. So I like
more
it.
Like fun right now, it's a new thing. It's kind of fun. I'm not going to change it legally. I've heard of all the horror stories of women trying to change it, and my husband could care less what I do with my name, because we know who we are, we know what we did, and we know what we intend, so the government really doesn't need to, but heck, why not?
Yeah. My mother hyphenates her last name only for her career. She's an artist. And when she does anything as an artist, she hyphenates Stewart Sanabria, her last name. So it's.
Does she also have a longer first name?
Huh?
Does she have a longer first name?
Denise.
Okay, that's not too bad.
Yeah, it's not too bad, but Sanabria. So yeah, I'm sure you're going to have to. Well, I mean, if you didn't do it legally, you shouldn't have to spell it too often, right?
Right, yeah. I mean, and I don't write anything, but sometimes when I do write things, it, goes off the page.
Yeah, right. So do you have some predictions in draft form somewhere for 2024, and was ChatGPT used to help in producing those predictions?
So I don't have predictions. I've certainly been writing a lot, as I tend to do, and every once in a while, when I get stuck, I will go to ChatGPT and say, ask it a question, a prompt. My latest one was I asked it a question and I said, in sarcastic terms, because that's how I often write. And it gave me some really funny suggestions. And of course, that gets your mind off of the initial, what am I going to write? How am I going to write it? Am I going to make a point?
Right. The blank page.
And so
problem.
it sort of kickstarts what I find with ChatGPT more often than not, especially if you're trying to write something about a breach or an active exploit. There are disclaimers everywhere, like we don't cover this. This is illegal. If you're looking for cybercrime, we're not it. That kind of thing. But I think if I were to use ChatGPT instead of my own rating, it would be incredibly obvious. But I find that in the ideation phase, it helps spark some ideas. So it's a useful tool in that way. But for me, at least, it's not to the point of, hey, I'm going to give it a few prompts and let it do its thing, and that's, what I'm going to put out there. I'm still writing all my own stuff. I still fact check it in various places because, I know that between you, me, and Tyler, I'm the third wheel who is a little less excited about LLMs and AI. I'm still cautious about what it does, what it can do. There was just another story in the news. I don't know if we have it on our list today to cover, but about Sports Illustrated and a huge gaffe that they had with trying to pass off computer-generated text, as human written. So I'm not quite there yet, but I know it's
that's what BuzzFeed did, right? Didn't they lay off like all their journalists and just replace them all with AI generated content? I think it was BuzzFeed.
and there was something about them trying to pass it off as a human.
Right.
And that's, like BuzzFeed uses it, but they're really upfront about how they use it and who wrote it. Like they have a name for their ChatGPT generation tool. I don't know if they're using ChatGPT or something else, but they notate that this was written by quote AI. They don't try to say, hey, this was human generated. They're very clear, and I think that's a good way to do it if you're going to experiment with it.
Interesting. So I hadn't even thought of that, like a future where AI journalists have muckrack profiles.
I'll try to find the article. Weird. I'll send it to you because it was interesting because there are companies who are using it, but they will have a special byline, and some of them have, names and even profiles for their robot writers.
That's
so
weird.
They're still having fun with it and they're using it, but they're being very clear that this is what's going on.
Interesting. All right. Well, we got a bit of a late start and we need to get to our first interview. So quick announcement here. You can join our Discord channel to chat with our hosts, ask questions, customize live stream alerts, and more. Visit securityweekly.com/Discord to receive an invite. And I keep an eye on that during the recording, so you can blast stuff at me live, questions for whoever we're interviewing, and I'll do my best to pull it in if it's relevant. All right. For our first interview today, we're talking about securing nonprofits. We're excited to have Dr. Kelley Misata with us today. She's the founder and CEO of Sightline Security, a nonprofit that helps to secure other nonprofits. Kelley is the senior director of open source at Corelight and the president of OISF, but it was her PhD work that led her to found a nonprofit to look out for other nonprofits. Welcome to the show, Kelley.
Thanks, Adrian. It's great to be here.
Yeah, and great to have you. I met you. I helped you raise some money for Sightline a couple of years ago. Full disclosure here. I believe my memory isn't what it used to be, but I believe Helen Patton might have pointed me your way. I don't know if you know Helen.
You know,
Somebody recommended
I can't.
your charity.
Maybe it was Wendy Nather.
Wendy who?
Remember Wendy Nather?
Wendy Nather. I don't think it was. I mean, me and Wendy are good friends. But I do believe it was somebody within the Tinkerers. But
Awesome.
But yeah, I thought this was a
regardless, I'm excited.
Yeah, somebody pointed us your way, and I looked into the organization. I love the idea of it. I do a lot of community and volunteer work myself, so it hit me right in the the mission oriented feels, and yeah, I've been wanting to get you on the podcast for a little while now. Glad you're here. So yeah, I mentioned in your intro that your PhD led you down this path. Maybe that's a good place to start. How did you choose your PhD, and what made you want to turn it into another business, that you have to run?
Yeah, exactly. Another hat to wear. It's a really weird tale, so I'm going to keep it super short. But I don't think that I chose this path. I think this path was chosen for me. I had some situations or a situation in my personal life that involved cyber stalking, and it went on for a number of years. And in that journey, I got the good fortune to meet some incredible people like Dr. Eugene Spafford, Becky Bass, and a number of other folks. And that is where I learned about the cybersecurity degree at Purdue University was from Spaff. And he said, why don't you apply? And I did, but admittedly, I applied thinking that was going to be it, because why would they invite someone kind of later in their professional life to join a PhD program? And particularly someone who didn't have a technical background. I have a background in an MBA in marketing. So I entered the PhD program really in the mindset of, I'm just going to grab all the new information I can to be able to help me understand how cyber stalking works, how the technology facilitates people to be able to be anonymous and outside the reach of law enforcement. And it was really sort of in that mindset that I went on that journey and earned this PhD. But Sightline was formed out of it because when you come to the end of your PhD program, you of course have to do a dissertation. Many programs you have to do a dissertation, and I stepped back and started to think about what organizations did I reach out to for help when I was at my lowest, and they were nonprofits. And so it was a natural progression for me in my mind to say, okay, I want to start looking at, are nonprofits prepared to deal with a security event? And I was lucky enough that my PhD committee, when I proposed my initial thought, it was going to look at the entire spectrum of nonprofits. And my committee was wise enough to say, get the degree first and then go save the world, and not the reverse. So my PhD research actually focused on organizations working with victims of violence because they had a sense of what security and urgency and crisis was like. I thought maybe the cybersecurity element would resonate with them. But the findings from that whole body of work made me step back and say, maybe there's something here that we need to continue. And it was actually Becky Bass, who, as some people may know, was considered the mother of intrusion detection and a luminary in our field. And Becky came to my dissertation defense, surprised me to support me. And after the defense, she said, you need to do something with this. You can't just let this sit on the shelf. And that's when the idea for Sightline came to be.
Wow. And I suppose I already know the answer to this, but how prepared are nonprofits generally?
It's surprising. there's a lot of nonprofits that have some of the early stages of saying, you're doing the right things, you're thinking the right ways. Are they where we as security professionals would want them to be? No, but I'm not sure many organizations would be anyway. What I love about the way we approach this problem from Sightline's perspective is that we go in with humility and just an open mind and say, instead of going in thinking, oh my gosh, you don't have resources, you're not going to care, this is not going to be top of mind for you, you're going to have outdated technology. Instead of going in with all of that baggage at the get-go, we go in with a clear slate, a clear mind, and we say, tell us about yourself. What are you doing? And our Kickstart program actually helps them measure against the NIST cybersecurity framework in a way that also prompts us to ask better questions so we can help guide them down this path in a way that makes sense for them instead of just kind of these cookie cutter checklists. And in that process, we're gathering some great information and we get to celebrate those successes with them. Because I have to tell you, watching a nonprofit organization be recognized for saying, oh my gosh, you're doing something right and you're actually falling in lines with the controls of the NIST cybersecurity framework and you didn't even know it, let's take a moment and celebrate. They are amazed. And that empowers them to say, oh, okay, what can we do next? What else can we find that we're doing well?
Yeah. And it's interesting, talking about nonprofits having limited resources, they just can't go through some of the same processes as others. I was just before we started this podcast, I was watching a cybersecurity office hours with Wendy Nather and Tara Wheeler, and talking about Wendy Nather's security poverty line idea. The idea that there's a lot of stuff in these checklists and standards that would be nice to do for some of these organizations, but they have to be Wendy was saying they have to be absolutely brutal about what they choose to do and what they choose not to do. And I think anybody who's been in cybersecurity for a while has some sense that there's, stuff that moves the needle and stuff that just doesn't, that just security products, tools, processes that just create busy work. Sometimes it has to be there for compliance, for regulations, but even some of the stuff that doesn't, I suspect we're either conscious of it or we suspect a lot of that could be cut out and it would just have no negative impact, but, it never had any positive impact either. So, how do you do that? Have you come up with, do you have to come up with a new checklist with a new approach for these organizations, or is it something you have to do custom for each one that you work with?
That's a great question. Well, and it's funny that you mentioned Wendy's, the initial thought around security below the poverty line. I actually contributed to her initial blog post or white paper that she wrote about that. And since then, when we were at RSA last year, it was funny because I said to her, I'm wondering if this notion of the poverty line is what prohibits some organizations to even step into improving security because they already feel like a failure because they're below this poverty line. So Wendy and I had a great sort of maybe next generation thought process going about what we could do there. But in terms of what I've seen at Sightline in my work with nonprofits, it's really interesting. So the NIST cybersecurity framework, which is the framework that we primarily use at Sightline, that and the CIS controls, they're written for these organizations to be able to disseminate to lots of people, right? NIST does it so that they can reach the masses. And that's fantastic. But one of the nuances that we're pulling out of Sightline is, how does the language matter? So I've actually redesigned the NIST cybersecurity framework into nonprofit language. And so we can use that to get people going on this journey in a way that they're not spending time Google searching, what do you mean by this? Or that doesn't relate to our type of business. And it's been really interesting because, again, I think part of the spirit of Sightline is that we know that we're trailblazing. We know that we're going into this wanting to discover things we didn't realize we didn't know at the time. And some of that is saying, okay, well, we can put together a checklist, but we may have to change it like a lot. And in nonprofits, what we're seeing a lot is that security and how you talk about it, where it's prioritized, what they need and what they don't need, varies wildly by mission. And so instead of bucketing nonprofits all as one big giant group, we're looking at what does it mean if you are local? What it means if you're national or international? What does it mean if you help children versus help puppies? If you are in the crosshairs of nation state attackers, it's all very, very different. But I think, we all kind of gravitate to thinking about nonprofits as just one big ball of stuff. And it's really not. So we're unpacking a lot of that at Sightline. It would be nice if we could do checklists, but we do a lot. I just don't find it helps them get there. And they're like, well, I can get that anywhere. We want somebody who's going to get to know us.
Exactly. The checklists are already out there. The value that you're providing is you can separate out what really matters from what doesn't, specific to them and children, puppies, whatever their scenario is. Now, I kind of intentionally, I didn't read up too much on how Sightline works. I had a bunch of questions, but I thought, why not just ask them on the podcast if I'm going to ask them anyway? But how do nonprofits find you, and how do they get helped by you? I imagine there's some way for them to maybe submit a proposal or something like that. I don't know, even like trying to get a grant or something like that. I imagine it's maybe not that intricate, but they've got to have some way, like, here's who we are, here's what we are, here's why we need help, and then you have to figure out, are they a right fit for you guys? I imagine you probably can't take everyone who needs help, so you have to choose somehow. So how does that whole process? How does somebody come to get helped by Sightline?
It's pretty organic right now. We've been really fortunate that a lot of nonprofits that have come to us directly. So they hear about us and they just reach out. And sometimes it's a board member that will search out or seek us out. Lots of times it's referrals from other nonprofits. Nonprofits, we're sort of in our own little clubhouse. Sightline is a nonprofit specifically so that we could be like our members. So when I started the organization, that was a very conscious choice, was to set us up as a nonprofit. So that's been kind of interesting to see how people are coming to us. We're also trying to go where they are. So I love going to the nonprofit conferences to say, where's this all fitting in with you? And actually talking to the vendors, the technology vendors that are supporting nonprofits, because I'm curious to understand their layers of security when dealing or offering services to these nonprofits. That helps inform us as well. But what we offer at Sightline currently, we've got some really great plans ahead for 24 and 25 if we have funding for it. But we have two really great sort of entry points for members right now. One is our member forum. So we have a discourse forum that is free for nonprofits to join us, and we provide updates. We talk about patches. We talk about new questions in our Kickstart program, which I'll tell you about in a minute. And we just try and build that community space, because the word that I was, some of our members kept saying to us, it's great that there's all these security conferences. It's great that there's all this stuff that we can go be a part of, but that's not us. And we don't play like those other companies. We're not like the for-profit space. We want a space that's just for us. So we created this member space that's free and available for anyone who's a nonprofit. The other thing we offer to help organizations get started is our Kickstart program. We take that modified version of the NIST cybersecurity framework. We walk them through about a 6-week journey of discovery of where do you measure against the NIST cybersecurity framework. And then they end their Kickstart program with a roadmap of improvement. But the roadmap is actually built in partnership with them. So instead of us just going in and saying, these are all the places that you are really, really not doing well, go fix them, we actually walk them through it, and we do it in the context of their business. So we spend time getting to know them. We look at documents. We do lots of public searches. We do a series of questions. And we take all that information, we distill it down, and we measure them against the framework. And then we have a conversation. And that conversation, that outcomes report, that is the biggest wow, because that's where we celebrate things are doing great and that they should sort of take to the next level, and where we can talk about things that they want to prioritize so that they have the building blocks for better security down the framework. So we do a lot of conversations around, if you do it, this part of the framework and the controls, you'll be better prepared to address these other elements of the framework. So our Kickstart program right now has been amazingly successful. Every organization walks away with not only successes that they get to own of them for themselves, but they get to have improvements that they chose out of that outcomes report to go and do. And they go and do it. And the best part is that many of our members who go through this Kickstart program, as they're going through it, they make changes on the fly. They're like, oh, we need that. We can go do that tomorrow. Can we change our score? So it's been really amazing to watch that happen. Many of these organizations pay for their Kickstarts themselves because it's the only paid service out of Sightline. And we're hoping to build a program where organizations can actually sponsor a Kickstart for a nonprofit of their choice. So coming ahead will be how we help organizations move from the next part from Kickstart down the path.
So help me understand, like once you decide to work with an organization, you do a Kickstart or something like that, who is working with them? Who actually helps them? Are these people that work for Sightline or volunteer for Sightline?
It is me and a couple of others. We're a small and mighty group, but it's primarily me, which you can imagine is hard to scale. So one of the things that I'm excited about building out for the next year and a half or so is a volunteer program for security professionals who want to partner with Sightline. And we would train you in how to become a facilitator of our Kickstart program. And I tested out this model a little bit when I built a graduate class on Sightline Security on our business model, so that graduate students could actually walk in the steps of how we do this with a nonprofit in the area. And it was really exciting for me to see and for the students to see, how do you hand over the reins for someone else to help facilitate folks through this process? But the other question you asked was how we vet nonprofits. You know, we do some research on our end too. We have pretty much a great policy of, if you are a registered nonprofit, you know, that's number one, of course. And, you know, if we do our due diligence and we sort of research a nonprofit and we can't really get a good gauge on if they have a mission of something that could be offensive or concerning in any way, we will dial back and probably offer them space in our member forum, join our member forum before we do a Kickstart. But knock on wood, every single nonprofit that has knocked on our door, we've been able to service with a Kickstart if they have been able to afford it.
That's great. That's great to hear. And what have you seen in terms of, you know, this could almost be a question for our next interview. We're talking with someone from Keith from Secureworks who studies cybercrime. But how big is cybercrime for nonprofits? I know like for a lot of people, the idea of attacking a nonprofit, seems like a really crappy thing to do. Though I'm not sure a lot of the cyber criminals really distinguish the type of organization that they're going after. As long as they have cyber insurance or they have some means of paying a ransom, I imagine they become a target.
Yeah, it's becoming a big deal. A lot of these organizations that are reaching out to Sightline, sometimes it's because they've had an incident. And that will spark them to say, hey, maybe we should actually understand this a little bit better. But I think the attack landscape is broadening, and nonprofits are going to be, one, caught up in the web or caught up in the net, right, of those attacks because they rely so heavily on third-party resources to be able to function. And, whenever we do a Kickstart, the first thing they say is, oh, Kelley, you're going to tell us not to use all of our favorite tools. And I said, no, that's not what we're here to do. But what we're here to do is to help you understand, to prioritize what are those third-party tools, what data do you have flowing in them, and how do you know if that third party gets hit with an attack? How does that affect you, and are you ready for it? So we see sort of this kind of duality of nonprofits and this problem around third-party risk, and with nonprofits who have to worry about targeted attacks. And that is a very different flavor. And when we do a Kickstart for organizations that we can tell by their mission, during my dissertation, a lot of the organizations I was researching were in human trafficking. Then you have to look at the attacker landscape quite a bit differently. But it's interesting because we do include this in our outcomes conversation with them, because we want them to have a realistic sort of sense of, where are the bad guys? Like, what do I have to be afraid of? Because I'll tell you, I had one executive director of a very small nonprofit, but it was mighty. It had a great mission. And she's like, okay, ransomware people, come on and get me. I mean, we were on a Zoom call and she was just like egging on. She's like, come on and get me. And I'm like, you don't want to egg anyone on to come and get you in this respect, because it not only can affect time and resources, so it disrupts mission. That's the difference with these attacks against nonprofits. You're talking about disrupting mission, not only impacting finances, potentially impacting donors, impacting other things, reputation, but you are impacting mission. So when a nonprofit gets hit, that means that whatever services they provide to a local community or a global community, that stops, or that gets circumvented in some way. And that is what matters for these organizations, is their mission, always.
So Kelley, so that was one really good example of how perhaps a nonprofit would approach cybersecurity in this wonderful training you're giving them, how that's different from an end user perspective in a corporation. And I know you've worked with big corporations as well. What are some of the more surprising things that you've found? Because I would imagine when you're going into these nonprofits, many of them don't have an IT team, much less a security team. So what are some of the happy surprises that you found in addition to this enthusiasm?
They're recognizing that social media is such a strong tool for them, for their mission, for reaching out to the communities, for getting donors. But every single nonprofit that we've worked with, and I always have to pause to say, is it really every single? It's my PhD coming out. Every single nonprofit that we've worked with has that sort of spidey sense when it comes to social media. So they have the right controls set up, which is fantastic. They have policies around it, and they've trained their people. And that, to me, was one of the biggest things that I walked in doing this work initially thinking, they're just using social media willy-nilly. Mm-hmm. So that was really exciting to see. The other thing is that they are not as trusting as people would assume them to be about making sure that others are taking care of them. So if they have a relationship with a credit card company or their bank, they are setting up the alerts for themselves to make sure that they are protecting those assets more than I expected to see them do. So those are really exciting examples. But they're just, it's so much more than enthusiasm, because what we're recognizing in our work, and this is where for Sightline to kind of stay present with them and to be with them on this journey where the value comes, is that early on when we started the Kickstarter, we just went in kind of with all of our security vernacular, even though it was massaged and redesigned for nonprofits, it still wasn't hitting the mark. And one of the biggest ahas for us that's made a huge difference with our members is that we talk about security as it relates to business operations. We talk about the value, not just in protection from the boogeyman under the bed, but we talk about it. How does that inspire more donors? How does that make sure that your mission never gets disrupted? How does that encourage more volunteers to want to participate with you? Like, what stories can they tell by being on this journey towards better security? And that's where they're starting to step in and going, we want to tell people that we have, all this great metrics around the NIST cybersecurity framework. They want to go out and show that they're on the path. They may not be perfect in the eyes of everybody else, but they're on the right path and they're thinking about it. And that's huge. And that comes from them really stepping back and saying, how does this operate in our business, not just protecting us against the boogeyman?
That's fantastic. It sounds like they're recognizing that, first of all, perfection is unattainable, but every step that they take makes them a little bit better. And maybe if we could migrate some of that attitude to the more corporate world, that would be helpful as well.
Yeah, and it actually sparked for me, Katie, when I did my dissertation proposal and I put this out to my committee, they were the first ones that said nonprofits will never want to do this. They'll never participate. I hope you have a backup plan for your dissertation. And I said, okay, I accept the challenge, and I don't believe that that's going to be the case. What number of nonprofits do I need to fill out my little survey for my dissertation? What number do I need to sort of move along in this process? And staff at the time said 56. He just kind of threw out a number. And I said, all right, you're on. I sent out 500 surveys through 2 national organizations. I got 222 back.
Wow.
222 out of 500. So that was the first indication to me that, oh my gosh, nonprofits are stepping up and saying, I think we should think about this. And how do we do this? And so that started sort of this mindset, but where we've evolved to thanks to the lessons we've learned and how we've seen them really in their true form when it comes to security, is that they're doing these things. They're doing things already in line with security controls. We just need to draw it out and use that as momentum to keep them going and to keep them thinking about it. So it becomes muscle memory, becomes part of the operations, and not as a special event they do in October.
Yeah, nice. And that's yeah, I love that. I love that challenge, assuming those were academic folks. Nonprofits are never going to go for this. I love that, okay, let's find out. Let's do this. I've done a lot of that during my career where it's lots of people can throw out assumptions, but the data's out there. You can gather the data and find out and put those assumptions to the test. So it makes me happy that you did that. And
thanks. Well, I think that's one of the big things about the work that we're doing at Sightline. We are working to debunk the assumptions about nonprofits and cybersecurity. At every corner we find them.
Yeah, yeah, and that's great. So speaking of nonprofits, your nonprofit, how will people find you? How can, if somebody wants to donate to Sightline or engage Sightline, needs your help, what are the best ways for people to find you?
Great way to find us, of course, is our website, sightlinesecurity.org. We are looking for a sponsor for our member forum so that we can hire some folks to help monitor that and bring more nonprofits into our community space. And we're looking for sponsors to help help other nonprofits do a Kickstart who can't afford it. And so, and for nonprofits, if you're a nonprofit organization, come on over. As we say, anyone who knocks on our door becomes part of the Sightline family. Even after a Kickstart, you're in forever. And I think that's probably an adage from when I met Becky Bass, who always welcomed everyone into her family, her professional family. If you're in security, you're always in that family with her. And so I carried that on in the Sightline world. So nonprofits are all welcome. Just reach out to us through the website. Find us on X. I keep wanting to call it Twitter, but find us on
You can
X.
keep calling it Twitter. We do.
Or you can reach out to me. It's very easy, Kelley at sightlinesecurity.org.
Awesome stuff. Thank you again, Kelley. Thank you so much for joining us on Enterprise Security Weekly today. I was really happy to talk to you about this and to spread the word about what you're doing.
Thanks so much. It's been a lot of fun. Always lots of fun things to talk about. So can't wait to do it sometime again soon.
Yeah. Let us know when you're ready to start signing up folks to help. I forget what you called that process, but when you're ready for that, maybe we'll have you back and can promote that so you can get some help.
That would be wonderful. I would love it.
Awesome. All right, stay tuned. When we come back, we're going to talk cybercrime insights with Keith Jarvis from Secureworks.
which is really not ransomware anymore. It's just breaking into a network and stealing data and then extorting them, right? So ransomware is not involved. So we're seeing that in increasing numbers, but it's still like a 90-10 split for if we have a known ransomware group, the attack that they prefer is one where they do use that extra lever of file encrypting ransomware deployed throughout the network. But increasingly, some groups are saying, well, it sure saves us a lot of time if we don't have to fully exploit a network and distribute an executable throughout the network to encrypt everything. If we just steal the data, that's still pretty good leverage. And a lot of people, depending on the type of data that's stolen, that may be enough for them to go ahead and pay out. And I think what we've seen as a side effect of that, and it kind of ties into what you're talking about with your earlier guest, is the sort of increased cruelty of some of the groups where they are going after nonprofits, hospitals, and they're using the really sensitive data like people's medical diagnoses and stuff like that as the leverage, their personally identifiable, PII, right? So they're saying, here's this really valuable, sensitive stuff that nobody wants released, and you're going to have a really hard time legally if we do this. And that almost supplants the leverage that you used to get from having destroyed their network, basically.
Yeah. Yeah, I remember when I first saw BEC, I was like, of course, that this is like the completion of the trend from cybercrime away from complexity. Like I remember, like if you're going to steal credit card numbers and have to sell those, like the amount of steps and the amount of work it would take, buy an iPhone, with a stolen credit card, sell it in some other market, it's just such a convoluted multi-step 17-step process. And then all of a sudden you see BEC where it's like, I'm your supplier. You owe me $1.2 million, send it to this bank account, and somebody does it. Like I imagine the first time a cybercrime group saw that work, they were like, okay, yeah, this is going to be the new thing.
Yeah, absolutely, man. And if you can steal more money easier, then everyone's going to do it. Everyone's looking for margins, right? And that's legitimate business people as well as cyber criminals. So they're going to go to where the margins are. And certainly BEC has shown that you can steal large amounts of money. You still then do have to wheedle it through the financial system. You do have to eventually launder it. So there's still some of that traditional crime step. You do have to have money mule networks and stuff like that. So it's not something that everybody can do, but there's a lot of crews that are making that work for them.
Yeah. So what's the latest on, like I've seen a lot of, a lot of components of this get taken down, right? We've seen a flood of takedowns where like the legal framework and big companies like Microsoft, have been able to take down things like Emotet. We've seen tumblers get taken down. We've seen like the Genesis market, I was going to bring up InfoStealers later, get taken down. How much of an impact, how usable is that extortion model with cryptocurrency anymore? Is it getting significantly more difficult for them to be able to extract that cryptocurrency and turn it into usable currency for them?
No, not really. I mean, certainly when you take away some of their tools they use to obscure those transactions, like you mentioned, tumblers, Bitcoin, which is still the main currency for extortion payments, pseudonymous, right? It's not easily trackable, but there's certainly entire companies that are made of, an industry vertical out of tracking those payments and then telling law enforcement where those payments are going. So it's still quite useful for these sort of extortion payments, and I don't think that's unlikely to change. And we've even seen some threat actors go to more untraceable stuff like Monero, but that's really a minority.
Right. Yeah. I remember we used to see Monero miners everywhere. Like there'd be this amazing hack, right? They do this amazing stuff and have access to all this super sensitive data that, they could have used to extort companies and stuff like that. But like the final move, Monero miner, and you just be like, oh my God, like what, this has got to be like a group of teenagers or something like that. The lack of imagination or realization of, the naivete of what they had access to. So are we seeing less of that, less Monero miners,
No, that's chugging along. So that's probably one of the top ways that if you're a relatively unsophisticated or maybe uninspired is a better word, threat actor, is to, even though your attacks may be sophisticated, the end result is just we're going to use the CPU resources here to chug away at Monero, and it's relatively low risk, right? I can't remember the last time somebody involved with one of these was indicted or extradited or any of those things. So it's pretty easy way to just sort of in the background, shave money off of, an easy way to monetize, a large number of infected machines, basically. Easy.
Yeah. 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 So I mentioned info stealers. This is kind of a fascinating move here in terms of malware. We've seen some pretty big breaches where malware gets on an engineer's machine, somebody with access to infrastructure at a large company. And, maybe it's not even targeted. Again, you have this cybercrime ecosystem, where there's different roles played by different parties. And, maybe whoever's running the info stealer malware just puts it up in a market, sells access to Uber or to Okta or whoever, LastPass. And I don't know, maybe it's more targeted. You could tell me, but I find it interesting. It seems to me like kind of it's cred stuffing 2.0 because, instead of stealing the actual credentials, you've got an OAuth key, which is actually, you could argue is better than credentials because MFA isn't a factor that you have to worry about anymore if you've got a signed in session, right?
Yeah, and we know that's one of the main things that the info stealers are targeting is not just the stored credentials, but it's also the session cookies that then can be used for some period of time to, if not change the password or something like that on the account, but then to at least access it before you're reprompted to sign back in. And that's been used in a number of high-profile attacks. And these marketplaces that we've seen, like Genesis Market, that sell the info stealer logs, have really sort of industrialized those logs. Like you can go on there, and search for a particular domain name or a type of cookie and say, you give me all the logs with that particular site logged in. And then that way a targeted threat actor can actually go use those very untargeted info stealer logs to then perpetrate an attack. And it's almost at a scale of industrialization where the credit card markets were 10 years ago, where you could just log into the dark web. You could say, give me 100, Amex business accounts with this limit. And you didn't even have to interact with another human being. You just paid the money and they were deposited in your account. And that's the same way it is right now with info stealer logs.
Right. And something I found a little surprising in here. I remember last time I was on the enterprise side in 2012, last time I was responsible for security for an organization, 100% of our malware infections were due to drive-by downloads. And 100% of those was because we had an old version of a Java plugin because there was, one group in the organization that needed to use a retail website that was using Java plugins. And, but it seemed like since then, browser security increased to the extent that I felt like I didn't really hear about drive-by downloads anymore. So it was surprising to me that was one of the things that you highlighted here. So I wonder, like with just all the isolation that has been introduced and locking down malicious extensions more, what's the mechanism? How are these drive-by downloads working these days? How are they getting past all the browser security we have these days? Are they out-of-date browsers that have vulnerabilities in them? Or is it just using social engineering to get people to click OK to install it?
Almost exclusively social engineering. So you dip back into the bad old days, 7-8 years ago, when browser security wasn't as mature as it is now. We talked about exploit kits earlier, when you could legitimately be browsing on the web and have your system infected through an exploit and have no idea that happened well, drive-by downloads these days are you go out onto the web and you're searching for something and you find it and you download it, but it's misrepresented what the file is, or you're in the process of browsing for something and a page pops up and says, hey, your Google Chrome is out of date. You need to download an update. You click on the button, you download it, and it's malware. So that's the social engineering aspect of it is the primary driver. You're still getting these things injected into legitimate ad networks, especially on Google search. But really, it's far and few between where we see a legitimate browser exploit being used for the broad distribution of malware. Sometimes that's used for targeted attacks, but very rarely for this type of commodity malware.
Right. That totally makes sense. And again, that's just one of those shifts that we forced, right? Like the browser security got really good. So why not, like BEC, why not just ask nicely for your target to do what you need them to do?
Definitely easier.
Yeah. Yeah. So another item you have on here, that this report dives into supply chain attacks. So I mean, this is something again that has been really concerning. I think I saw earlier this week that hospitals in 4 states couldn't accept ambulances because some kind of software that they use got attacked. So, certainly that, the idea that an attacker, cyber criminals can, get the benefit of scale by attacking suppliers, particularly software or service suppliers and providers. How much of a, again, like with info stealers here, like I know there have been some high profile cases, but I don't have the big picture here. So I wonder like how big of an issue are people typo squatting, plug in software libraries, stuff like that, and how much of it is just a few high profile cases?
But I think if you extend the definition of supply chain to anything masquerading as a legitimate application, then the info stealer sort of ecosystem, crime ecosystem there is a big part of it, because when people are out there trying to download legitimate software, they're often getting these Trojanized versions of it. Yeah, OBS, right, was a big one. But when you talk about what I think are the core sort of supply chain attacks, where a software developer and distributor is compromised in some way, and then their software is used to deliver something else, a backdoor or something like that. They're pretty rare, but they're pretty high impact when they do happen, and they're frequently in the realm of pretty sophisticated threat actors with lots of resources. And even then, when they do capture hundreds or thousands of victims, they're pretty frequently trying to narrow that down to a very small target set of high value people. For example, when North Korea is perpetrating them, they're looking for people who have relationships with cryptocurrency exchanges. The Chinese are looking for defense contractors or companies with IP, right? And it's not so much just trying to drop an info stealer on a system. So it's definitely a big concern, like both aspects of it. But certainly, I think people are more worried about the big one, where it's the application that's deployed throughout their entire enterprise, and they get a bad update from their vendor. It comes down, it's legitimate, signed, by all accounts, it's fine, but it's actually delivering malware. Like what we saw with 3CX, earlier this year, and before that, SolarWinds, et cetera. Those are the ones I think people really, really worry about.
Right. Like I remember we had a case, I forget how long ago it was, but where NPM, some owners of NPM basically got cred stuffed, I think, or maybe social engineered. And it wasn't the NPM library itself. It was the install script for the NPM library that was, ran the malware, which of course was Monero miner, if I recall correctly. So yeah, if you installed that NPM library outside of NPM, you were fine because the install script wouldn't run. Like if you did an apt update or something like that. But if you installed it directly from NPM, it would, that install script would hit you. But again, that Like, I don't think there were any actual breaches that occurred from that. It was spotted pretty quick, so, I, I don't know. Are there places where we're not looking close enough for this, that this could really sneak up on us and get us, or, it's like they're tightening up stuff a lot. Like now it's required for a lot of maintainers to use MFA, for example. There have been some moves there.
Right. Yeah. And they're doing that just because of that reason, because the ecosystem is so large and the dependency web is just so insane that there's probably an application in use at your company or anyone's company that you don't know that there's some random dependency. And at some point that maintainer could go off the rails. You could Trojanize it, or we've seen this with browser extensions a lot where bad actors will purchase a relatively popular extension, and then as soon as they buy it and they control it, they can put their own code in there. But with npm, Python pip, all these sort of repositories for modules for the different programming languages are a perfect spot to get into a network, because there's all sorts of applications that are constantly updating their modules against that, and there's really nothing besides community watching it to prevent that from happening, or antivirus maybe seeing that there's a Monero miner being dropped because you've just installed this thing. But that's pretty much the only thing coming between that sort of supply chain attack and you, right?
Right. Another difference that I've noticed here, from maybe 10 years ago to today. 10 years ago, we would give the advice, here's what you need to do to protect against cybercrime, which was largely opportunistic at the time and wasn't targeted. And just a completely different level of effort you would need to protect against nation states. But now 10 years later, a lot of nation state tools have kind of trickled down, tactics have trickled down. Now that criminal groups seem more organized or run more like businesses, they have R&D budgets. Do you see the gap between nation state attacks and some of these cybercrime groups going for 7-8 digit paydays? Is that gap narrowing, in terms of the sophistication and what organizations have to do, the lengths that they have to go to be able to defend against these?
It's probably narrowing, but not by a substantial degree. I mean, we see even the largest sort of ransomware operations, something like Conti a couple of years ago. They were making tens of millions of dollars. They had dozens of people on staff. But then once all of their data leaked, you just saw what a more unorganized mess the whole thing really was. So it didn't look anything like a properly organized criminal, conspiracy. Didn't look like a military unit engaged in espionage. So it was just kind of chaos. That doesn't mean that all ransomware groups are like that. But at the same time, I think governments will just naturally always be more resourced, right? Because just the financial resources that a government can bring to bear will be far more than any criminal organization can. And other resources, maybe the military runs the group that's actually doing the network intrusion, but they also have teams that can then take the files and they read a language and they can go through the data that's stolen and process the important stuff, or maybe they're out there setting up shell companies to buy infrastructure, and they've just got those sort of resources that criminal organizations don't. So there's probably some closing of the gap there, and there's certainly tactics that are trickling up from one side and down from the other. So they're sharing a lot of that information, but I don't think we'll ever see where we've got criminal organizations that can match a government sponsored organization.
Okay. And I don't know if it's just because I'm looking a little bit closer these days, but it seems to me, especially when I prep for the show, I look at a lot of news sources, and databreaches.net is one of those that I look at. And to do some prep for this show, we're talking about ransomware a lot in the news segment of the show. There's a bunch of stories on it. Katie has a Substack newsletter, and her latest one is about increases of ransomware. And I was just going to go grab some stats on ransomware for the month of November, and the RSS feed I think is limited to 50 on databreaches.net. And I couldn't even get, I think November 13th is as far as I could go back. Is it just me, or is there a lot more ransomware going on right now? And the kind of follow-up question to that is, how are the bad guys scaling this? How are they able to hit so many companies seemingly all at once? Is it a small number of groups doing this, or is it just because there's so many ransomware groups now?
So
sorry, that was a lot of questions.
Yeah, no, I'll try and address the first one and then probably forget the rest of them, but remind me. So yeah, I think the amount of attacks is certainly on an upward trend right now. For a while there, it was kind of hovering, sort of steady state, but it's certainly on the rise now. I think this summer we finally crossed 10,000 victims that had ever been listed on a ransomware leak site, which is a pretty big milestone. And we know that the number of victims that actually get published on there pales in comparison to the number that are actually compromised by those same groups. So it's probably a multiplier of 3x, 4x, could be 10x the actual number of victims who don't make it onto that website. So certainly the problem is still here. It's getting worse. And I think that the way that they are scaling that up is, we've seen, we talked I think earlier about dwell time, at least on our initial call, and that dwell time for a threat actor to be in a network until they deploy ransomware has gone down precipitously over the last year, from about 5 days to 24 hours. I think actors are speeding up their operations for a number of reasons, which means they're gonna churn through more volume of victims. The victims are probably getting quite a bit smaller. You see a lot more dental offices on these sites than you do, Fortune 500 companies. And a part of that is that these groups are increasingly uninterested in really spending the weeks and weeks inside of a single network trying to fully exploit it, to really get that devastating ransomware attack. They're more content to get in a day, maybe 2 or 3 days, steal some data, maybe deploy ransomware, and then, just by law of averages, if they exploit 10 victims versus 5, right, they're probably going to get more payout from just churning through more victims. So that's kind of the way that they're scaling right now. It's a pure volume game.
Wow. Okay. Yeah, and I assume a lot of their operations are automated these days. So it was something with generative AI. I was wondering, if they could even take that to 10x another level. If you could have like a GPT style LLM, even do the negotiation part, the small parts that are still manually done by a human. Or I assume they still are. I don't know what they have and haven't automated.
Yeah, we know that a lot of those negotiation sites have a chatbot on them, so there's no reason that any of the LLMs that have the chat capability couldn't just be plugged right into there, and that'll free up their resources to go do something else. In their conspiracy. But I think where we've seen automation is a lot of the attacked methods that were used, like by a human threat actor, hands-on keyboard, after getting access to a network. A lot of that stuff is increasingly automated. So, for example, one of the drive-by downloads that's quite prevalent is one called SOCGolish. So this is one that sits on compromised websites, makes you think that there's a Google Chrome update or Mozilla Firefox, etc. When first of all, they geofence it to just Western countries, the richest countries. So there's already a triage step, making sure that they don't get countries where the victims don't have as much money. And then once they run the script on your system, they see if you're joined to a domain. So there's another triage step. They don't want ordinary consumers. They want somebody who's on a corporate network and joined to Active Directory. And then the next stage of the malware runs the traditional reconnaissance commands. It looks at who the enterprise and domain admins are, how many domain controllers there are, who am I, the sort of things that you would normally do as somebody breaking in when you first land on a system and trying to get your bearings. And all that stuff is automated and happens within 10, 15 seconds. And before that victim goes up to the threat actor's dashboard to see what victims they should exploit that day, they've got that map of the network. They know how many endpoints there are. They probably know who the victim is. So a lot of that stuff that used to be very manual is now automated form. And most of the groups are doing some form of that, where they're baking in the reconnaissance into the first stage malware. So that way they don't have to run all that stuff and then do the manual triage.
Right. Yeah, it seems like, each individual group doesn't have to be all that sophisticated. There's a lot of benefit of the whole community here, kind of joining forces and having the an ability to specialize in different areas.
Yeah, I think that they certainly benefit from having specialists, people who can do infrastructure, people who can do the C&E aspect of it, the people who are experts in Cobalt Strike, and that's kind of why we saw Cobalt Strike become the de facto standard. Is so many people became familiar with it, then everyone just sort of used it, even though there were other options available. And what a lot of these groups have also done is document extensively. So, they all have playbooks, they all have flowcharts on what to do when an intrusion happens. Like if you land on a system, here's the next steps you should take. Here, you should go look for their hypervisor and try to encrypt that. And they're all trying to, in a weird way, like document things to bring up the next group of people behind them. To educate them on how to perpetrate these attacks, because that's just going to make them more money if they've got more people in the trenches running those attacks on their behalf.
And so another thing in here, that I'm a little hesitant, I should say hesitant to agree with is patching. It's I've been doing vulnerability management for a long time, and I've rarely found an organization that can really, in a meaningful way, patch quickly enough, especially when looking at the data, how quick attackers are to exploit things. It seems like, and I'm eager to get your thoughts on this, but it seems like mitigations, like back when Log4j and Log4Shell came out, the companies that did the best in that scenario weren't the ones that could find it and patch it the quickest, but the ones who are already doing, a lot of outbound traffic blocking, on systems that really didn't need outbound communication. Like it didn't matter if you could exploit something coming in, if it couldn't reach back out to the C2 and establish a connection outbound, didn't really matter. So just wondering if you have any data on how quickly you have to be able to patch things, for patching to be an effective control versus, having mitigations in place that will make likely attacks inert or more difficult to pull off.
Right. I guess it all depends if a proof of concept code comes out. Really, that's what accelerates things more than anything. So vulnerability can drop and maybe give you some time to patch. But if the working exploit code comes out, then we know from experience over the last how many years that it's going to be immediately exploited en masse against the entire internet. So you would really have to have a very aggressive patch regime to get in front of that. I guess what we recommend is that if you have any sort of device that's on the public internet, that you need to have, a patch regime that can patch it within, at a minimum, 24 hours. Just be like, red alert, this is out on the internet, so it needs to be a priority, no matter what sort of downtime we have to incur to make that happen. But the other problem is a lot of these exploits happen on appliances, which are essentially black boxes that you're not allowed to put your own EDR monitoring software on. Maybe you can't even configure the logs to come off of that box, and it's just a lack of visibility about what's going on there. So if you can't patch, you can't even really see what's going on inside that machine, and that's a real problem. And I think you kind of got at it is surrounding those sort of devices with other security controls, network monitoring. So at least what's been talking to it, how much data has been coming in and out of it, and when. And then having a plan for, basically sequestering it if you do suspect a compromise. But again, really making it a goal to patch it as fast as possible. And maybe that's, like in your experience, not always possible. But I'm not sure what other what other things you can do there.
Yeah, so maybe as we wrap up the conversation here, what are some of your takeaways from your recent research? What should companies be focusing on, and maybe do you have any thoughts? It is getting close to that time when everybody needs a prediction blog post, needs to put out a prediction blog post. Um, what
Yeah,
do you see shifting that people should be ready for?
Yeah, well, my prediction last year was going to be there's going to be an increase in attacks that originated from USB sticks based on some emerging data we saw from two different threat groups. That didn't materialize, so my prediction fell flat. So maybe I'll just stick with something a little bit safer this time. But
Think about
yeah,
attacks via USB sticks. I just saw a story on that.
Yeah, it's not something that's gone away entirely, but there was some velocity behind these two groups. So one was a criminal ransomware group called Gold Drake. They distributed Raspberry Robin, and there was one called Bronze President, a Chinese-based threat group that distributes PlugX, and they both used USB to great effect. And we were seeing it quite a bit in our IR engagements. And I thought, hey, maybe that's something that people have sort of forgot about, just like drive-by downloads. You don't really think, well, the USB stick is going to be the way that they get into a network, but it was for many of our clients. So yeah, it didn't quite materialize. Both of those groups sort of backed off, but it's still one of those things you really got to be. You got to know if a USB stick gets plugged in your network somewhere, can you track that back to date and time and what was on it and so forth like that. So it's kind of like basic security hygiene, right?
Yeah. I mean, it's as far as I know, dropping a bunch of USB sticks in a parking lot still works. One of them will get plugged in at least. All right. Good stuff, Keith. I really this was selfishly a lot of fun for me to get a bunch of questions answered that I already had. So I really appreciate you coming on the show and letting me fire questions at you.
Awesome. Thanks for having me again.
And it's a great report. Highly recommend checking it out. You guys did a really good job with the executive summary. I love how it's formatted. Really easy to go through instead of just blocks of text. They really break it up in a useful way. And highly recommend checking this out. Don't go away. We'll be right back in a few moments with the weekly enterprise news.
Koba, Richard Hughes, Vincent Zimmer, and more. We discuss topics related to firmware and supply chain security, uncovering those pesky vulnerabilities that lie, well, below the surface in your environments. You can find all the episodes and subscribe by visiting eclipsium.com/podcast or searching for Below the Surface in your favorite podcast catcher.
Security Weekly. You can now find us on Instagram. Follow us for highlight reels, giveaway announcements, and more at Sec Weekly. That's SEC Weekly. All right, now for the Enterprise Security Weekly News. Mr. Tyler Shields has joined us. Hello, Tyler. Good to see you.
Hello, Adrian. How are you doing, my friend? Great to see you, and great to see you as well, Katie.
And did you see, it is no longer Katie Teitler before you. It is Katie Teitler. Damn, I'm scrolling through my script. Santulo.
Yes.
So it is funny. I just finished putting the final touches on this week's issue of the Cyber Y, and I feature a KD, what I thought was a KD Teitler article in the Cyber Y this week. And sure enough, I looked. I'm like, why is your last name changed? And yes, congratulations, Katie. That's fantastic news.
Thank you.
All right. If you want to follow along with the stories we're talking about today, which are probably too many for us to go through, as always, when we take a week off, we took a week off for Thanksgiving. You know, we now have 33 articles here to go through. A lot of them maybe we'll go through all at once. But you can go to securityweekly.com/ESW341 if you want to scroll through there and browse the different stories that we've pulled in for this segment today. All right. So yeah, funding, like there's no huge funding in here. I don't think there's any companies I even recognize in here. So still seeing a ton of early stage stuff, some, debt financing for older companies, not a whole lot in between. C's and D's and beyond are still extraordinarily rare, it seems.
Yeah, I mean, the world has recalibrated, I guess, so to speak, right? And companies have gotten smart. They've gotten to the point now where they're raising what they need. They're not raising what they want. They're raising what it takes to actually maybe run a business and build a business. And it's probably still overfunding. Many of these, like $5, $7, $10 million seed rounds and A rounds, are probably overkill for what's really needed, but it's 25% of what was happening at peak insanity. So yeah, congratulations to these early stage companies that are, Cybel, 6.2 million. Actually, it looks like that expands their Series B, so they're not a good example of what I'm trying to say here. But AppMap, 10 million. What's the 7.7 million here for one that doesn't have the company name in the title? Lasso Security emerged from stealth with 6 million. A Parisian company, Kevlar with a Q. That won't make it hard to find when you're Googling it. Raised 4.5 million
Kevlar.
euros.
I think they're wanting it to sound like Kevlar, like Kevlar vest
with a Q. So when you search for it, you'll incorrectly spell it, but that's fine. That'll work.
Yeah, you'll get it.
Yeah,
it'll Google will correct it. Will correct your spelling of their company's name.
Oh, that's wonderful.
To the
Google's
wrong
smart
thing.
enough to help you out. But anyways, handful of companies this week on the smaller end in the seed rounds. There's a couple of B extensions, the Cybel B extension. So no real surprise here. New infusions, and yeah, we're just seeing the correction down to. I was watching another podcast today of a very, very famous angel investor that both Adrian and I follow very closely, and he commented that we're actually seeing valuations in the 2009 to 2014 range now for early stage companies, which I found that to be a very interesting commentary in the sense that we've regressed a decade with regards to early stage valuations. They're coming in now in the seed to A round, pre-seed round in the 5 million, 8 million relatively consistently, which I think it's a good thing. I think it's a reset that we needed.
I think it shows a sign of maturity for our industry that a lot of people have been working for a long time. I think when we're in security, those of us who live and breathe it every day, it's like, come on, this has been around for a while, but it really hasn't. And just the the push towards all of this new innovation, the push towards, hey, cyber is the next new frontier, I think it shows that we're actually starting to enter a period of a certain level of maturity, that it's not the newest, shiniest toy. And like you said, that's a good thing. We don't want to be the newest, shiniest toy. We want to be reliable, dependable, effective. I know probably some people will argue, but that should be the goal of security programs and security tools.
Yeah. Now, Tyler, were you saying that the valuations are going back a ways, or the funding, or both? Funding size?
Well, the valuations are jumping back about a decade now. So it's normalized.
Because it seems like the funding sizes are still the same, right? Because you still have to pay people the same amount, right?
No. Usually they're probably actually recalibrated lower as well, because most of your early stage funding is based on a percentage of the company that they're trying to achieve. It ends up mapping. But you can kind of think of it as just that peak curve in valuations that we saw hit, 2021, the insanity levels where everything was billions of dollars on no revenue and everything was out of whack, has now normalized back to about somewhere between, and I know it's a wide gap, but 2009 to 2014 window of valuation amounts for compared to revenue, right? Compared to where a company might be sitting at in its growth phase. So I personally think this is a great thing. It brings it down to reality. I think maybe even a little bit under where it should be today.
Right. Well, we knew it was overinflated. We talked about that, for a year and a half, right? Like every episode, we're like, none of this makes sense. When's it going to stop? And it hit a brick wall. Yeah. The thing, I imagine, as for the funding sizes, like number 3, Harfang Lab is a French company building an EDR. I would imagine, if anything, the amount of capital you need to build a competitive EDR is more, not less in 2023 dollars. But maybe because they're in Paris, like that's something they can pull off. They can be like an EU specific EDR, and that's how they compete.
Yeah, I'm definitely not. I wouldn't even consider myself an amateur when it comes to European funding and European cyber. Like, I just generally have stayed focused in the United States, trying to keep my scope tight. But so can't really comment on that. But what I would like to throw out there is that this same particular angel investor that I was hearing on a podcast not more than an hour ago also said that most companies now are actually building their businesses using AI. So actually using AI to speed up the pace at which they can do research on their market, the pace at which they can create positioning and messaging, the pace at which they can create sales collateral, everything is increasing in speed, which is lowering the cost that it takes to actually create a business even further than it was already lowered by having SaaS platforms that we would leverage.
With the exception of that EDR one, I think every single one of these 10 funding items here is either protecting use of AI, or like there was a quote I wanted to throw out here. Lasso is setting the standard for LLM cybersecurity by safeguarding every LLM touch point. So every single one of these 10, except for the EDR one, I think is either using AI and mentions it, in the funding post, or is like Cable says, AI powered threat intelligence, AI powered threat investigation for federal bodies. It's just pasted onto the front of everything. So, apparently that's the new big data, the new zero trust. Like it's required to be in every funding raise, apparently.
And the funny thing is, that's not even what I'm getting at. As much as I appreciate that and agree with you, what I'm getting at is literally just the tasks that have to be done to build a business.
No, I know what you're saying. I'm just saying it's fundamental level. Yeah, it's in every part of it.
It's impacting the whole stack. Yeah, it's impacting the whole stack from bottom to top, from business fundamentals to how you deliver your technology, to protecting AI directly itself, to maybe using AI in a protection angle. There's so much of a hook here. It's almost impossible to ignore. And I've said this before, it takes me back to .com days, right? When I was watching the web emerge, right? Because I'm that old guy. And for those of you that see me on camera, I've got the gray beard to go with it. You're sitting here looking at these websites popping up left and right in 1999, 98, going, holy smokes, there's something here. That's what this feels like. Again, I have no idea how it'll manifest itself or what the end game will look like, but it's really neat to be a part of.
Well, now they're popping up left and right because there's like 20 tools out there that will auto-generate your website using AI. So, yeah, maybe that's the justification for the smaller funding rounds is, well, you don't need a marketing team anymore. You can just let AI do it, right? And I laugh, but I'm only partially joking on
that. It's funny because it's true.
Yeah, it is. So Broadcom completes acquisition of VMware. Most acquisitions, people aren't really bullish on, people who are using the product or people who work there. But in this case, most of the stuff I've seen on LinkedIn and other channels have been pretty negative, mostly because they're laying off a bunch of people, and other stuff that's gone in Broadcom has generally not increased in quality.
Yeah. I was just waiting for the remainder of that headline, right? The headline specifically says Broadcom completes acquisition of VMware. I was waiting for the ... and then lays off tons of staff, right? Because that's been the news.
Yeah, it's already happened.
The second half. Yeah, that's been the big news in the last, I think, 48 to 72 hours has been the quantity of layoffs that are occurring around the acquisition. At the end of the day, Broadcom operates really close to a private equity firm. Right? They come in there, they take things over, they force their own processes into play, and hey, maybe it'll work. Maybe, at the end of the day, it's going to make Broadcom money or they wouldn't have done it. But, what'll it mean for the VMware technology and the people that adopt it? That's, to be determined. Sometimes it's a very big positive outcome and improvements occur. Most of the time, as you're alluding to, it's not. Most of the time, the technology falls by the wayside and dies off, and they milk the cash cow for a number of years, recoup their money, and go do it again.
Yeah, was it Broadcom that swallowed up Veracode and then spit them back out? That was very private equity looking. Like they, I think they made like $500 million in profit doing that or something like that.
Yeah, so CA picked them up. Then Broadcom bought CA, and at the moment of acquisition of the CA into Broadcom acquisition, when that closed, they simultaneously spit Veracode out to offset the cost of the acquisition of CA. And I believe, they were bought. Veracode previously was held, or post was held, has gone through a couple different private equity holders since then.
Right. Yeah, interesting. Yeah, I hadn't thought of them like a PE firm, but you're right. They do operate a lot like that. I imagine IBM does to some extent also. Well, IBM, they buy stuff and let it slow. Yeah, they buy it and let it slowly die. It's a little bit different at IBM.
I cannot comment on IBM, but yeah.
Yeah. A few other acquisitions here I don't think are really worth talking about. SonicWall picked up somebody was doing managed detection and response for MSSPs for small businesses, which makes sense because SonicWall is, I'd say probably the majority of their customer base fall into that SMB, SME category. Let's see. What else here? Amazon Q, I thought was, it's worth mentioning that it's out there now. And even with ChatGPT, barring all the drama around the the executive, and the stability of the company, everybody can build their own. It's easier than ever to build your own GPT now. Now that Amazon has this and ChatGPT lets you build, custom tailored stuff, it's just super easy to take a pile of data, feed it in, and create a custom chatbot to respond to questions based on that data set.
100%. I found it to be so easy. I did it this week to support the Cyber Y. I wanted to see how easy it would be to create a version of myself. So I created a ChatGPT bot that I called Snarky CMO, and fed it with a bunch of previously written stuff of my own. And yeah, sure enough, it's pretty good, pretty accurate. At the end of the day, I still don't use the text that it generates directly with any consistency, but it sure as hell can trigger creative sparks in my brain for my own writing when I'm struggling or looking at a blank page. And given enough time and given enough data set to chew through, it'll be able to emulate me very, very well at some point.
So it's going to write the CyberY while you're sipping on daiquiris at the beach.
That's my plan someday. I just want to be rich and do nothing. That's the plan.
Yeah. And my problem is I like doing stuff. I will, if I die, it'll be from doing too much stuff. I'll just run myself into the ground.
We should get connected. You and I will work together someday.
Yeah. I mean, maybe that's something I'm doing is just noodling around on a bass next to you on a beach when you've got a guitar, but I've got to be doing something.
There you go. I like it. Let's learn some music together. You can sing for us, Katie. You can be our vocalist.
Oh, God. That would be horrible. Don't do that. I mean, that would be a good way to clear the beach, I think.
Turn it into a private beach. Works for me. Yeah, so it's and the main reason I put this in here is, and like I can't imagine security organizations like trying to monitor this stuff and negotiate this stuff. I mean, everybody and anybody at an organization has to be throwing stuff in all these AI assistants and playing with it the way we are, right? But at the corporate level with corporate data, and who knows, like we've been saying for a while, it's inevitable the wrong data is going to go in there, and that chatbot's going to be hooked to like the intercom bot on your website or the support at acme.com address or something like that. Somebody's going to realize they can ask support at acme.com for private data, and it's just going to give it up. So that's the reason I mention it.
And at the core, this is, this is data security. This is system security. We're calling it AI security, but at its core, it's got to protect your systems and the access to the data, and then protect the data. I mean, if somebody wanted to be a real a-hole and they had access, they could just poison that data set over and over and over again.
So I'm going to check in a counterpoint here. And this is I want the audience to know this is a off-the-hip counterpoint. This is not something I put a ton of thought into. So why are we that worried about data disclosure in that environment when we had literally the exact same feelings the first time Dropbox came out, or Box came out, or in general putting stuff into Google Drive? And now there's not a company on the planet, well, maybe there is, but no young company on the planet that doesn't have all of their data in the cloud in Google Drive right now. What's the difference, right? At some point in that model, we had to trust that Google would safely secure it. Now, sure, there's going to be screw-ups. I admit that. And it's, some point this leakage will occur and some people will get in trouble and hands will be slapped and issues will happen. But why is it as big an issue as it is when we had that same problem a decade ago? Yes, Katie, you're retorting.
I have an answer. I don't think that's a counterpoint to what I'm saying at all. I think actually what I'm saying is I agree with you. This isn't a new problem.
Yeah.
And why do we care about it right now? Why is quote unquote AI security a big deal? Because look at our funding list here. That's why it's a big deal. Because people are throwing money at it. This is not a new problem.
I mean, we spent what did it take, like a decade for people to start correctly configuring their S3 buckets? It's just that happening all over again.
Wait, aren't we still waiting for people to correctly configure their S3 buckets?
Probably, in some cases.
And so the lesson to be learned there is that there was risk. The provider, and we have to trust the provider in some ways to either automate the fixes or at least give us configuration capabilities to put secure guardrails in play. And it may not be there today because we're early, right? But a year, 2 years, whatever that number is, we can expect that a certain level of security has to be implemented for people to adopt it. The providers of the service will implement those security bars, and they already are, in the sense that, for example, my snarky CMO chatbot only has access to what was originally in the training stuff and what I handed, not what Katie hands it, right? So there's already a certain level of delineation and guardrails that are occurring. And in the long run here, this is just going to be another another similar storyline 5-7 years from now to putting other data pieces in the cloud, and we don't even have to worry about it.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And it goes back to what you said. These companies can use AI to find the solutions to figure this out a lot more quickly than we had to deal with data security 20 years ago, right? Like Dropbox and for whatever the other tools are. It was like, oh my God, don't do it. And now nobody thinks twice about it. I mean, some companies might have acceptable use policies, blah, blah, blah. But like you said, lessons learned. And now we can use, whether it's AI, machine learning, whatever, to create these tools more securely, more quickly anyway.
So I am so much a fan of this idea, and I'm not worried about the security of it, that I'm going to jump ahead to, I don't know the story number, maybe you can find it quickly for me, but the Notion new Q&A feature lets you ask an AI about your notes. Have you looked at that article?
19. Yeah, 19.
Yeah. Article 19 is pretty awesome in the sense that I've been transcribing meetings now for a year.
Yeah.
I've been transcribing notes that I take into Notion for a year. The CyberY works off of Notion workflows, so every article I've ever put into the CyberY is listed in a Notion database. And now I get to have a chatbot that looks at and analyzes all that information for me in real time.
Pretty exciting.
My second brain is coming. I can feel it.
Yeah.
Well, this is what you were
I'm
talking
pretty
about 4 or
excited about
5
that
whatever
too.
months ago that you wanted to build. They just did it. They did exactly what you wanted, essentially. Should have patented that
I'm
idea.
going to be the first in line to sign up.
You're never
Yeah.
going to buy your island if you just wait on these ideas and let somebody else. But yeah, I mean, this is great if it can help. If it, it's just like we've been talking about automation forever, right? If this speeds up your workflow, this isn't replacing a human. This is, well, I mean, in some cases it might be, but it's just creating greater efficiency. It's stopping us from digging through. I was digging through notes the other day looking for something that I knew I wrote a company 5 years ago or whatever. I know I have it, but I had to manually go through my notes because guess what? They were written down. And I still haven't found it, so I had to just go off of memory. That's not a really great, efficient, effective, accurate way to work. Why wouldn't I?
And I've always had one central place that I put all my ideas and notes in, and that place has moved over the years. It's moved from Evernote to OneNote and then to Notion. But man, the other day, so I know Evernote's getting shaky. Everybody thinks Evernote's maybe, has weeks to live or something like that. So it's like, I better get the rest of my stuff out of there. It took 10 minutes and like a few clicks for Notion to siphon the whole thing in. And so, yeah, I've got most of my thoughts from the last 10 plus years all in one place. So giving me the ability to leverage that, like the way when I was an analyst, the way I would use Evernote and OneNote, I would use it during inquiry calls. And like I'd remember enough details about something I wanted to talk about to type it into the search bar real quick. And, without even slowing down what I was saying, I could sound like I had this amazing memory, and start citing acquisition numbers and specific details and stuff like that. So, the power of a tool like that, is just really amazing for anybody that needs to be able to work with a large set of information like that.
Well, I mean, isn't that at the end of the day, isn't that exactly what we're trying to achieve? The older I get, the less memory I have, right? When I was younger, I could remember stuff a lot better than I can now. And my wife always loves to tell me I can't remember anything, but that's a whole other discussion. But at the end of the day, the older we get, the less we can remember because we've just seen so much. We've done so much. And if we can note it, comment it, record it, see it, have it saved, and give ourselves the ability to have a second brain that we can query in real time that finds things efficiently, that's powerful. And I think that's, I've been saying it for 6-8 months now. That's what we're on the precipice of.
Yeah. All right. Moving on, there's a few things I want to mention real quick before we get to ransomware, and probably want to spend the rest of the time just talking about ransomware. And so some weird legal stuff in the news here. And I mentioned all three of these during the intro. The Binance founder and chief, Changpeng Zhao, pleads guilty to money laundering charges. An ex-COO for, what was the name of the company? I mentioned it in the intro. Secureworks, Atlanta-based company. Are you familiar with Secureworks?
I know the story you're talking about. I'm not familiar with the company or the founder, but holy smokes, that story.
Yeah. So we always used to joke about this. We always, back when I was pen testing, stuff like that, we recognized the fact that a company is much more likely to take security seriously after a breach, right? So we used to joke what we need to do is start the breach as a service company, and just get them over that hump, right? Instead of them just waiting for it to take it seriously. And it seems like this guy literally did that and decided to use that as a lead generation tool. So he deliberately launched online attacks on 2 hospitals, later citing the incidents he caused in sales pitches. Wow.
Oh, the cojones on this guy. Wow.
Yeah, I want to see the sentencing, but there's a plea deal.
Pleading guilty to prison term of 10 years, though he may never see the inside of a cell. The court was recommended to instead sentence Singlet to 57 months of house detention due to his suffering and, quote, extraordinary, end quote, rare and incurable form of cancer.
Oh my gosh. Talk about adding drama to drama.
Yeah. I mean, Arma already caught up to him is what I'm hearing. Attacking hospitals, and now hospitals can't cure his cancer?
Irony.
If that's not karma, I don't know what is.
Karma. I mean...
And the final legal story gets even crazier. So I don't know how many folks remember Hacking Team, but it was very similar to the what was the Israeli company? It was basically selling implants and stuff like that, and being used to spy on journalists and things like that. There's another one of these companies in. Sorry, do you remember the name?
It's like right here.
Not important. It's not the one we're talking about today. The one we're talking about today is the Italian-based company called Hacking Team that did some of this stuff, and they infamously got hacked by some kind of hacktivist. I don't think they were ever identified or caught, but they put out this huge, like 8,000, 12,000 like word post about why they did it, step by step how they hacked Hacking Team. And the company never really recovered from it. And apparently neither did its founders, because one of the founders, or the founder, was arrested for attempted murder. Tried to kill a family member with a knife. So news just gets weirder and weirder.
I highly recommend reading the story, because I read it this afternoon myself, and just I could not believe the despair, the how much that spiraled so negatively. I mean, it was negative right out of the gate. It's one of those companies where you're not really rooting for them. You're just like, really? You're going to make money that way? But then you watch it just spiral down the toilet bowl, and then the personal impact that it had on these guys. It's just pretty awful.
So, funny anecdote about this. This was written up by my friend and journalist Lorenzo Franceschi Bicari. I'm not sure how to say his full name, but used to work at TechCrunch, now works at, used to work at Motherboard, now works at TechCrunch. And he posted this on LinkedIn. And so this image that you will see everywhere you see this story, this marketing image for Hacking Team, like that picture is not a picture of any of the employees. That's a picture of somebody from the marketing firm that helped put together their marketing. And somebody tagged him in the LinkedIn post, and in Italian, he basically said, here we go again. Like, my face is associated with this damn company.
Oh my gosh.
So that is not the guy who tried to stab his family. That is somebody who runs a content PR firm in Italy. That's
That
his
poor guy.
face. That he gets to be associated with this horrible company and its horrible
No wonder
founders.
he looks so unhappy.
So be careful who you take on as clients, I guess is the lesson here. All right. So, yeah, let's jump to ransomware. The very first ransomware story I have here is the aforementioned latest newsletter from the Reformed Analyst. And I figured I'd hand off the mic to you. We already talked about this a lot in the last interview. So if you haven't listened to that, I'd recommend going back and listening to the interview with Keith Jarvis. But yeah, and that basically confirmed, ransomware is definitely on the rise. They have the numbers to show that. But yeah, Katie, what made you choose this as the topic for your last newsletter? Or your most
Because
recent
quite
newsletter?
literally every morning when I sit at my computer, what I do is I, go through my daily routine and I get my bowl of cereal and my cup of coffee and I open up my 16 tabs of security media and it's like ransomware. And I'm like, oh, for goodness sake, we had a dip. It was so nice to have some variety for a little while. And now, it's just everywhere. And it's obviously not going anywhere. And like we talked about, I don't want to harp on this because we did have a great conversation, or you had a great conversation a little bit ago. It's evolving, it's morphing, it's more than just ransomware at this point, but like we're going to start to see some major issues if people don't take this seriously. And ransomware isn't just about, some admin. I don't mean like security admin or IT admin. I mean some, executive assistant was tricked into giving up her or his or their credentials. I don't mean that. We have to get past that. We have to actually do the really boring work of foundational security, because that's the only way to mitigate this.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's funny. I just authored this week's The Cyber Why, and I have a link in there to your stuff because I thought it was a great report. And I too have been it's constant. It's a constant deluge of ransomware. It's probably every other day or every third day. A hospital,
it's every day.
Bank. It's literally every single day, and it's absolutely insane the volume of ransomware. But at the end of the day, and what I put in my article is there was just this week there was a big bust of some Ukrainian Ukrainian gang. I think it was within the last couple of days. And I said, so what? Who cares? It's not going to make a dent in ransomware, because when there's money to be made and there's criminals who are smart enough to do the work, it's going to happen. And the problem is there's no silver bullet. There's not even close to a silver bullet that can solve ransomware, because ransomware is basically leveraging the fact that there is a weak link. Doesn't matter what it is, because ransomware is not the problem in itself. It's the outcome of the problem. And so you have to solve all of the problems to be able to thwart ransomware. So we will never see the end of it if it continues to be capitalized, if it can continue to make money for the attackers.
Yeah, and it's the whole security program. It's not security awareness. It's not just a phishing issue. They will use any means to get in. Like I've said in the past, every ransomware case I look at just basically looks like a pen test, and pen testers almost never fail. So neither are the ransomware operators. And they even they've got a much better setup where groups will just get initial access, and they'll hand that off to somebody who's going to go in and do the internal work, grab creds, pivot, get ransomware on all the systems or steal the data, or, whatever they're going to use as leverage for extortion, for getting some Bitcoins out of you. Yeah. And it's, like we talked about in the previous interview, it's incredibly automated on the attacker's side at this point, and we're nowhere near. Defenders are nowhere near as well set up to defend against this.
And just like he said in that last interview, it's so prevalent, and there are so many holes, and there's so many ways that this can be affected, that they can automate it. Automation only works if there's reliability and predictability. It doesn't work
Yeah, it's not an option.
as well
Yeah.
on things that are random. That's the
For a
very
lot of
nature
it,
of
yeah.
it.
Yeah, I mean,
Yep.
at the end of the day, we won't see a stop to it because they'll just
No.
move from attack vector to attack vector until we have perfect. And I'm putting this for those who aren't watching live on video. Perfect is in air quotes until we have perfect security. If we have perfect security, ransomware ends, right? But there's no such thing, and we know that there's always going to be different weak links that can be exploited. And if people want to take it to the ends of blackmail and ransomware, then that's where it's going to go.
Yeah, and if you want an idea of the scale of this, go to databreaches.net. I've got a feed of that in one of my Slacks that I'm in, and also in my Feedly. And it's one of the places I use to prep for this podcast. Dissentdo does a great job. It's just a single person managing this, and has been managing these posts for well over a decade now. But that'll give you an idea of the scale of what we're talking about. Like the entire first page is just a single day. The entire second page rolls across, or next two pages is a single day. So it's just astonishing, the volume.
My first footnote in this article is basically, don't come at me if you see bigger ransomware stories, that have been popping up in the news in the last week, because I always write these ahead of time, and I don't have the time to go back and correct everything with all these ransomware, stories, because they're just every day. It's crazy.
Yeah. All right. In our squirrel story here, we're running out of time here. Tyler's going to have to leave us. So how a tiny Pacific island became the global capital of cybercrime.
Is that your island, Tyler? The one that you're buying to go and play your guitar on?
I would never, ever leave you guys early to play a guitar. Never would that happen. However, I do have a call that starts at 5:30, which I just texted the person, so we're okay for a few more minutes.
Okay, cool. Yeah, I think I've heard like 40% of their income, maybe it says it in this article, some huge amount of their GDP comes from just the running a TLD that ends in .tk. Just the web is just them running this .tk domain is a massive amount of this tiny island nation with 1,400 people. Smaller than most people's idea of a small town. Yeah.
And just for those listening who did not know what Tokelau is, or where it is, because I did not, according to Wikipedia, Tokelau is a dependent territory of New Zealand in the southern Pacific Ocean. It consists of 3 tropical coral atolls, Atafu, Nukunanu, and Whakaufo. And I'm so sorry for the pronunciation.
25 million domains, .tk domains out there.
You know what's funny? And maybe Katie can correct me if I'm wrong on this. She might know the answer to this. But I think that TK is a 2-letter combination that's not used in the English language at all anywhere. Is that correct, Katie? The reason why I think that's the case, and the reason why I think that's the case, is it's a copy editing term that you put it into a piece and say TK fix this or TK change this. Because if you do a search for TK within the piece, it'll only show spots where you've commented.
Right.
Because
they're 2 letters
TK
that you never see together in the English language. Yeah,
that's right.
Mm-hmm. So are you thinking that's related?
You can put that in your useless book of information. And the reason why I thought of it was how many words end in TK that we could use to register domains, and then I remembered none, zero English words.
Yeah, I'm trying to frantically Google search.
And yet it's incredibly popular as a TLD.
Wow.
Which is funny because it's such a weird ending. It's not like you'll end a word with 2 letters that makes sense to make like a whole word for a domain or whatever. Makes 0 sense. Very bizarre.
There are words just outkicked, outskilled, outkissed, outkisses, catenate, tight knit, netkeeper, outkeeper. So there are, in fact.
See, I told you
Which
that's
I
why I
should
wanted to
have
ask
known,
you.
but
I
I got a
wasn't
little
sure I was
nervous
right.
when you
And
asked me. And
the real question is then why do copywriters use the TK?
I don't
And
know,
we are
because
way
they can
down a
use
rabbit hole
TC.
here.
Don't know.
It's an editing mark
it's a
that means to
surprisingly-
come and is the equivalent to leaving a blank or brackets in text.
Yeah,
It's
it's an abbreviation, albeit an incorrect one, of to come. But that's TC. I don't know.
Man, did I take us down a squirrel hole, didn't I?
There are so many squirrels running around.
Squirrels everywhere. And
Latka.
for
Okay,
those
that's
that care,
Latka is not technically
I'll
an
even
English word,
post-
but
I'll even post into our Discord a link that talks about the history of the use of TK for those that care.
nice. Yeah, that's that is a funny rabbit hole because that's one of the reasons I liked Medium, using Medium to write blog posts is it recognized that when you put TK in there, and the publish button wouldn't work if you still had a TK in your draft.
That's brilliant. I didn't know that. There you go. We
Oh, you
learn
didn't know
something
that?
every day.
Yeah.
No.
Medium to this day, Medium is the best like writing experience I've had. Very minimalist, bold. I don't even think you have underlined, bold, italics, headers. You could do some embeds, but it was just very nice to write in. It was easy to share your drafts with other people, which you can do in Substack and stuff like that. But yeah, recognize TK. When you put TK in there, it would not let you publish.
There you go.
Until you removed the TKs. Yeah. Yep. Yeah. So I had to ask, this is a very long read, this Squirrel article. So I had to ask ChatGPT to summarize it for me. And the TLDR is, despite initial benefits such as connecting isolated atolls and generating some income, the .tk domain's misuse severely tarnished Tokelau's reputation. The territory now faces the challenge of disassociating from the cybercrime hub image and restoring its international standing with its future sovereignty possibly at stake.
okay.
All
there you
right.
go.
And that is the end of our podcast for today. And the end of our news segment. Thanks so much, Katie and Tyler, for joining me today. Today's been a whole lot of fun. I highlighted my week, many weeks, doing this podcast with you two.
Let's go.
Feel better.
All right, I have to. I will not be here next week. I'll be on vacation, and hopefully my COVID needs to be completely gone. I will sleep around the clock. I'll do whatever it takes for that to be gone, so I can take my vacation. So that means we've got Dr. Doug from Security Weekly News sitting in for me next week, and I will be helping with the prep for that, prepping news articles and stuff like that. So Dr. Doug will be able to just show up and do the show. But I'll miss you all next week, but I very much need the time off.
Go have some Aperol
Yes,
Spritz
very
and
good.
pasta and enjoy.
Yes, I
Oh,
will.
yes. Enjoy your trip. Enjoy your vacation, Adrian. Get healthy, buddy.
Big thanks to everyone for watching or listening to this week's episode. The show will be back next week, though I won't be here, but I'll be back the week after that.